All right. Well, I think we're ready to kick off. We've got everybody up here, and we'll go ahead and get started. And we'll see if people can trickle in as they wish. So, welcome to the ninth episode of Revelo Roundtable. I'm Kirk. I'm the head of business development with Revelo Intel, and I'm going to be the moderator today for this lovely gathering. For those that are unfamiliar with Revelo Intel, we're an institutional grade research firm. We focus on providing investors with the tools they need to simplify the due diligence process on DeFi projects. And for protocols, we kind of provide a gateway for you to connect with your ideal user profile as you guys are seeking ways to scale your KPIs and further the cause of your protocols. Bridges and interoperability, man, they're kind of the rails on which DeFi has flourished. I also think, I think we all know that they're also, I guess, very, very large risk vectors, in DeFi too, with things like multi-chain and wormhole and some of the ripple effects that those can cause. So I think it's a really, really polarizing topic, and obviously it's like critical infrastructure. So I'm really excited to have you three with us today. You guys come from like three of the most innovative, I think, bridging protocols in the space and some of the up and coming interoperability protocols. So definitely excited to chop it up with you guys. We're going to start with a round of introductions. Give you guys a couple seconds to introduce yourselves, talk about how you got into DeFi, your background and your protocol a little bit. So why don't we start with you, Nick, over at Across?
Yeah. Hey everyone, I'm Nick. I'm the CTO of Across Protocol. I've been at UMA since the beginning. UMA is an optimistic oracle, and in 2021, when Optimism and Arbitrum were about to get to market, we figured that a really good use case to build would be an L2 to L1 bridge, and also would be a time to showcase the UMA oracle. So we built an L2 to L1 bridge called Across, kind of as a demo of what you could do with UMA, and then it ended up being like a really useful consumer application. So we just spun out a team focused on it. But we are the same team as the UMA side. Yeah, I'm really excited to speak.
Awesome. Welcome, sir. Welcome, sir. Arjun, how about you, sir?
Yeah, I'm Arjun. I'm one of the founders of Connext. I and Connext have been in this space for quite a while. I had my start in building products on top of Ethereum in like 2016, and then we started Connext in 2017. Connext's whole focus from day one was trying to figure out how to make blockchains and Ethereum specifically like accessible to any average user. And so I think pretty quickly that led us down the pathway of scalability in 2017, where we built one of the first like L2s in the space. And then in 2020, when we kind of saw this like massive explosion of L2s, we realized that there was this big need for interoperability. And then similar to today, I think similar to Across, we are like an intent-based protocol. We and Across are two of the projects that have kind of pioneered that model, which we started, I think, back in 2021. Of course, they weren't really called intents back then. And I think our focus has largely been on trying to find ways to leverage intents to just completely abstract away the interchain experience from users. So deliver that like Web2 like UX where a user can just go to any application and just use it without having to think about chains, without having to think about like gas, without having to think about like RPCs, et cetera.
This is my favorite discussion we've had so far because that's the world that I wish I lived in right now. um, Last but not least, we've got John over at Hyperlane.
Yeah, so I'm John. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO of Abacus Works, which is like the core developer company behind Hyperlane. I guess like similar to Arjun and crypto for a little while now, I guess professionally since like the end of 2017. And what we're building in Hyperlane is, you can think about it as an open framework for interoperability. The goal is to have something that lets anyone connect any chain and doing it on their terms in a way that they could basically like run a business on, incorporate it into their stack. And I was really happy to hear Arjun talk about kind of the notion of, they've always been focused on kind of bringing scalability, because I think that's really what Interop is about, truly. I think where we are today, like, I think the three of us here, like, we're putting our life energy into crypto. We are doing it through like our respective companies and our respective protocols, but really what it is all about is we're trying to increase the demand for crypto. It's what we've been doing our entire time in the industry. And I think what's become like as obvious as in December 2017, then again in 2021, and once again just in the last few weeks, that for crypto to deliver on its like promise, right? There still are glaring issues whenever global demand comes onto any one of our chains. And so in the past few years, it seems like the best way to scale is through, call it the Ethereum mini roll-up roadmap, what some people, including myself, like to call it the modular ecosystem. And in my view, and this is kind of like why we've built Hyperlane the way that we have, if you're going to have thousands and thousands of roll-ups and different layers of roll-ups, you have to have an interoperability solution that at least lets you set the base pipes, doesn't do as sophisticated things as like a cross or a Connext do, but sets the pipes so that on top of those pipes, it becomes easier to build something that's kind of user-facing, like cross or Connext, and letting anyone be able to do that, like no gatekeeping around that, providing a lot of customizability. And I imagine we'll probably be talking a lot more about that today.
Yeah. You touched on something at the beginning of what you were saying, John, about kind of growing the overall pie, right? And that kind of being like the ethos of what you focus on. I think especially in the bridging space, we've seen, I mean, obviously a lot of companies coming out and developing, their own bridges, their own take on how to scale, right? But along with that comes competition, right? And there's been some very spicy competition, I think, in the world of interoperability and bridging. I think Axel, our intern, I was joking a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about the most famous interns on Twitter. Axel, our intern, might be the most famous, or infamous rather, for some of the things that are coming out of that account. But I guess, how do you guys, I know, John, you've already mentioned this, but maybe, Arjun, you can take this next. But how do you guys think about the interoperability in bridging space? Is it a winner takes all market, or how can multiple projects like coexist in this space and really further the goals of Web3?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I feel like this question gets asked a ton, and I'm always really interested to hear the way that people respond to it, because it really gives very keen insight into, one, how big of a problem people think this is, and two, the ways in which people's attitudes towards that problem have changed. I think if you asked this question back in 2021, many folks would have said yeah, it's a winner take all, right? There's one. There's going to be one system for connecting all of the chains, and everybody's going to use that system, and it's just going to be like the internet. But I think we've found is that just doesn't really make sense. If you kind of project into the future, everything in the future is going to be bridges and chains, right? So it stands to reason that the total addressable market for bridging and for interop is at least equal to the size of the market for chains today, which is in the multiples of trillions, right? And it would be ludicrous to think that that's a market that could be captured by any single project. My perspective on this is that no, there is in fact a very positive thing that comes out of having multiple options in the space, that there's actually more complexity to this problem than most people realize, that there's modularity in bridging that mirrors the modularity that exists within chains themselves. And that modularity means that not all bridge projects or not all interop projects are even competitive to begin with. And that even the ones that are actually have healthy ways to compete that are net positive for the ecosystem.
Nick, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I tend to agree with Arjun. I think the space is really, really big. I think if bridges completely overlap on the chains they support, the tokens they support, and whatever features they want to offer to fillers, there is probably a winner takes all, because it is a network effect problem at the end of the day. But I think that the way it's going to shape out is that these bridges are really settlement systems for intent fulfillments, and they offer to fillers a differentiated set of features that they can use to fill the intents. Like some chains or some settlement systems might offer the ability to take a refund on any chain. Some settlement systems might offer like a very like left tail set of tokens that another settlement system doesn't offer, and then fillers will ultimately pick the settlement systems that they want to use or that like best meet their use case. So I think across these different categories there will be many different bridges. Like within the categories there probably will be a winner takes all, but the space is going to be so big, there are going to be so many categories that there are going to be many bridges in the long run that succeed.
Yeah, it's good. It's good to hear that ethos, because I mean, there's, at least in my personal opinion, right? Like, there's healthy competition, but then there's also, I think competition in ways of like expressing that competition that hurt the space overall, and some of the things you see are definitely along those lines. At least as far as like the vacuum of crypto Twitter, at least. John, I wanted to ask you and kind of start with you with this.
But wait, before we even go into the next question, I got something. So I
go ahead.
tell you, I have a very,
please,
like counter, I guess, like intuitive point on this, but I think it just comes from being in crypto for a long time. Nick, I think like in a completely like regular and rational world, you're totally right that even that within like the same place of overlap, that it will be winner take all, but I actually think crypto is a little bit different because, so if you think of anywhere else where we've seen like network effects happen on the internet, there is less affinity involved, but here there is. And so like imagine that you have two players covering the exact same set of features for the same set of chains. Why would I like not convinced that there will be like winner take all and maybe at best like winner take most? Is that they're very likely to have an asset that the same people who are using are likely to own. And because of that type of affinity that really doesn't exist in other areas of the internet where there are network effects, right? Like most people who own who are on Instagram don't own Meta stock. Most people who use most people who use Uber that clearly has like a network effect in its marketplace, they don't own Uber stock. But many people who will be using and perhaps even like a majority of users of a distinct app in crypto will be owners of that app's distinct asset. And so now there's a different dynamic, there's a different motivation to use one thing over the other, even if like all reason tells you, no, I should be using this thing that has like, a slight edge in its pricing, a slight edge in its settlement time, a slight edge in its features otherwise. And so I think this dynamic completely changes and is what has changed crypto and this, differentiates it from other parts of the internet as we know them.
Yeah, John, I think that's a really good point. So you're kind of saying like when bridges on the same chain, same feature set offer different assets, there's differentiation. But not even just different assets. There's kind of like stickiness of like reputation and reliability. It's kind of like how I'm an American, so in the US, I live in New York, there are many like big banks available for me to bank with. And it's clearly there's not a single winner. Like I could bank with Wells Fargo, I could do Bank of America, JP Morgan, and they kind of all offer like pretty much the exact same like features to me. And then there's stickiness. Like maybe my family member used Bank of America, so I use it. So I definitely think it's not like single winner takes all, but there probably is like a power law distribution, or there's just a lot of concentration at the top.
Yeah, let's stick on this for a minute, John, because I think you said something interesting about kind of like the ownership, right, of I guess of the bridge and feeling almost like that's like your a sticky mechanism, I guess, for it. Where do you guys think the best use of a token comes in? When it comes to like an interoperability protocol, is it revenue sharing? Is it governance? Like, where do you guys think that token actually has a good spot? In a protocol like that, or in your own protocols? John, I guess we'll start with you. We'll go back to you first.
I think John may have disconnected and reconnected.
Oh, gotcha. We'll wait then. Arjun, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, yeah, it's a good question. So I guess it really depends on like where in the stack you're talking about. I think over the course of the last like couple of years, even if this is something that's not like considered general knowledge, we like at least bridge protocols have come to realize that there's like three pieces of the interop protocol stack, where at the bottom layer you have kind of transport, which is basically like the piping that like Hyperlane builds and that John was talking about, which is like the core infrastructure that is actually used to like deliver message payloads between chains. And then, most of these transport mechanisms are heading towards an approach of like modular security. There's some approaches, some that are still more kind of monolithic, like Axelar has like its own inbuilt security. But approaches like Hyperlane, there's Zero, and others are heading towards a model where like you have a security layer, some provider that comes in like, provides like a light client or like an AVS or something like that, that is used as security for like message passing between two chains. And then of course, all of that is the sort of, core message bridging piece, but then that part is still quite expensive and complex and really for the same reasons why chains themselves and L1, like Ethereum L1 is going to be expensive and slow for forever, really. For the same reasons, there is a need to have a like meta layer on top that just batches up user transactions. And that's the intent layer that Connext and Across operate at. I think depending on what layer you're at, there's a different model for how a token should fit in. So for security, for instance, there's like a very kind of obvious answer to this, which is like, well, your token should be used for like directly contributing to the economic security of the protocol. So that's like staking or something like that. Ideally, again, if you're renting security directly from Ethereum through an AVS or through just like the Ethereum L1 chain itself, then you don't have to worry about that as much. And then ETH is the token for it. In the case of something like Hyperlane, so I'm kind of very curious to hear John's response here, but my intuition would be that like a token would be most helpful to be used to like make the system as permissionless and as open as possible and basically manage incentives for the relayers that are actually responsible for delivering message payloads between chains. And then for the intent layer, I would also say something similar where like, solvers are like beholden to a certain set of like rules effectively between each other, right? They have to kind of coordinate with one another to be able to fill intents efficiently and do that in a way where they're not like, leading to an outcome which is net negative for everybody. And so I think there's a kind of similar situation there where you could like stake a token to make sure that solvers are behaving correctly within the confines of a certain system. So yeah, I mean, I think the TLDR there is that there's a lot of different vectors. My personal belief is that like tokens are best utilized in the long term towards like supporting some of the core missions of like a given protocol. So like making it more permissionless or making it more secure or making it more, reliable and like enforcing that from a like with something like slashing.
John, do we have you back?
I have returned. Sorry about that. X app.
No worries. Elon's rubbed
every
me
so often, Twitter just decides to kick you off.
Absolutely.
Just like, hey, go home.
Yeah. Did you have any thoughts on this?
I agree with a lot of Arjun just said. Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Arjun was saying. And so I think on the whole, and any type of system like this, and hopefully you guys can hear me because my headphones just seem like they just died.
Yep, you're good.
But terrific. So I got into crypto in large part, or like I got into it professionally, not because like I was just so excited about what it means for like the world and the concept of being able to reinvent the financial system. I always thought about like I want to work in an area where I could use incentives to like influence things, and nowhere did that seem more readily apparent than in crypto. And so I think the key thing to keep in mind is what Arjun was saying. Like I think the best long-term use of tokens is to drive towards the long-term mission, the long-term goals of a given protocol. And so I think specifically like at the transport layer, not everyone would agree, but it seems very clear that Arjun and I are in agreement on this. Using it to make the protocol as permissionless as possible, as accessible as possible, is the best use. of a token, and that's something that I think is like very exciting, like the possibilities of what actors who otherwise like would never come to the table. But like I think a lot about something like BitTensor. I don't know if you followed it. A number of my friends are big fans and run subnets of their own. There are now, dozens of people and entities who are running substrate chains, which are genuinely some of the most difficult pieces of crypto infra that anyone could choose to run. Why are they doing that? How are they coordinating towards it? Because there is a token incentive mechanism. That is the thing that got these people for the first who didn't even know about anything about Polkadot, didn't care about substrate, or maybe even worse, thought it was just heaping garbage, and now they're actively participating. And I think that's kind of like the power of these types of crypto incentives. And so at the transport layer, again, they can be very, very powerful in advancing the permissionlessness of a protocol.
Yeah, agreed. Nick, did you have any thoughts to add on that? I think you're muted.
Sorry, it
No
makes a
worries.
lot of sense to at the transport layer, as John and Arjun were saying. So Hyperlane obviously has a very natural use case to help incentivize economic collateral to secure the messages. In Across, it's like the UMA token is used exactly for this, but like I know we're going to talk about AVSs later, but the UMA or Across token would be used to help bootstrap like a restaked collateral position, for example. I also think, I guess it kind of, you can use the token in many different ways, and I really like John's framing of whatever is best for the protocol, you can use this token for, especially if there's an actual reason to hold the token. So longer term, if the token has some sort of claim on revenue or some other like reason that it should have value, you could use, like we use it as in our referral program to help drive volume, although that will be sunsetting soon. We might also use it to help bootstrap like the liquidity pool in our hub and spoke model. It's kind of just extra like juice you can use as a protocol to guide user behavior. And I think that's what's really cool about building in crypto is we have access to this liquidity.
Yeah, agreed. And you mentioned AVS, so it might be a good time to touch on that actually. So, I think one of the most mentioned use cases for AVS is bridges. If Eigenlayer was live when you guys were launching, or when you were, I guess, developing the architecture, would you guys have launched as an AVS? And I guess if not, why not? Nick, we'll go ahead and stick with you.
Yeah, I definitely think so. The way we use the UMA Oracle is like pretty much as an AVS today. So the way I think our model works very similarly to the Connext architecture, where user submits an intent, filler fulfills it, and then over the course of like X number of hours, some third party batches together a set of repayments, and that batch undergoes some sort of challenge window, after which all the repayments are sent. So the frequency of these repayments directly impacts the capital efficiency of the relayers. It allows them to reuse their capital faster and faster. So one of our main goals in Across to support more volume is to allow these repayments to happen on a more frequent occurrence. So something we've been toying around with is if we can get access to restaked ETH, we could suddenly get a lot more economic collateral backing these messages, which would allow, with a little bit of a tinkering with architecture, to just allow faster repayments. I think it's just amazing that there's so much TVL right now behind the Eigenlayer that using it for bridges is a really good idea and something we're actively exploring.
Just want to call out something really quick here, which is one of the reasons why I really, really like. So you asked earlier about competition, and I think like overall, there's obviously a lot of sort of shitty competition in this space, and like you kind of see that on Twitter because that's like the most visible. But I think there's a lot of really awesome competition too, and I like Across is one of those projects where like I love competing with Across, not because of anything else, but because you guys are fantastic. You are a fantastic team with like the right values. And one of the ways in which that shows in what you just said, which is that, you know, rather than just trying to like stay married to the UMA token forever being like the core security mechanism, you are open to like playing around with things like restaking as a way to improve the security of your system for the benefit of users. And I think that that's just like, that is the kind of actor that we need to see in this space, right? That is how protocols should be operating. Like there's so much value that is yet to be captured if like folks are willing to like work on standardization or work on like putting aside just like simple bag holder bias to think like a couple of steps further to like what could be possible.
Yeah, well said, Arjun. Yeah, it's been great competing with Connext. I really like your architecture as well.
John, did you have any thoughts on the AVS topic?
We're building one. We've been working with EigenLayer since fairly early on. It is a means to an end. But I don't know. What I see in practice is that almost no one cares about security. Certainly not our primary kind of user of Hyperlane, right? Which are new chains that are launching. And security is a thing that, to me, you kind of like mature into needing, right? So a chain on launch day doesn't really need it, but once it's seeing, you know, $1 billion of weekly economic activity, then certainly it needs it. And you know, economic security is useful, but like it's only useful if you can command, you know, like so if I'm staking $1 million, well, it's only securing anything if it's at risk. And so insofar as it's not at risk, it's not really providing any security. It's just like just a number. I think there's like, I think some of the Vitalik arguments and, you know, some of the other like core ETH folks around kind of the risk of restaking in general are very well taken. You know,
This space was downloaded via spacesdown.com. Visit to download your spaces today.
So I'm very interested in how this plays out. I think it's a market that like is really, really not well understood. I think it looks a lot more like the insurance market than, let's say, like the market for securitization, which is usually what people consider it to be. Like, oh, you know, just rehypothecating some stuff and like you can underwrite that risk. But it's like, no, it's not like that. Like, you know, I think about this very differently if it's just my protocol paying for this slice of the amount, you know, like if I'm paying for $10 million of economic security, I have one price for it. And if you, me, my brother, my cousin, and 30 other people are paying for it, my price is very different and it's noticeably lower, right? Because like how good is the security that you're getting if someone else's actions can take it away from you, right? You could be a good Samaritan. You could do all the things. You could pay your premiums. You could force no slashing event. But then one day another protocol does something and you were paying for $10 and now you only have $5 in that pot. And so I'm optimistic about it, but I think I see a lot more growing pains, I think, than most people who are not very close to it see.
Yeah, I wanted to add onto that because I actually had some questions. I do agree, like without slashing, the restaked ETH is kind of like it's not really like you really have to heavily discount it because if it's not that risk, like how much is really backing it right now?
Yeah, no one knows this better than the UMA team. Like you guys have had real disputes around, you know, like around outcomes and like, so what happens the first time? And again, like I've spent a good amount of time with some of your wonderful colleagues, whether it's Hart or folks like Sean and a few others, and it is a very, very difficult thing to resolve. Again, no one here knows this better than you, so
I think what's going to be hard, like the way at least the docs read the first time, is there was kind of like one size fits all type of slashing, like you slash everything after some trigger is hit. But in practice, you're going to need some sort of like dynamic slashing based on like the severity of the fault. And I think I don't know how much thinking there has been done there, or like what it's going to look like at launch. But if you don't have the ability to like change how much you slash based on how you like violated the law, then it's not going to be very usable.
Yeah, and there's just like that. Once you start actually going into this, the level of complexity that comes up is immense. Right now, all the depositors are just thinking, sick. I'm probably getting some credit towards an airdrop. So that's one risk profile. I also know my funds are not actually at risk because there's no slashing. Once there are different flavors of slashing, then there's basically different risk profiles that a staker is taking. Do they know what kind of risk they're taking? Are there going to be, call it, so I used to be a bond trader many moons ago. Like, is there the investment grade, section of AVSs that I stick to, and then there's like the high yield section, and then how do you distinguish those risk ratings? Like, think we're many years into the issuance the operation of like different lending protocols. We still don't have like unified risk metrics. We have organizations like Chaos and Gauntlet that do an amazing job, but like we don't have a standardized way of thinking about the risk of operating with a single DeFi protocol. So now you're like, this stuff is going to be really, really hard to make judgments on, and to make it more useful for the people who would be getting the security, it needs things like you were just saying, Nick. And at that point, that makes it way more complex for the person who was just like, well, I just wanted to make a few more bucks on my ETH, man.
Yeah.
I didn't want to.
You know what's
That's all I wanted. That's what you told me.
You know what's funny? Like I also was a bond trader, and so was a lot of the UMA team, and I've exactly been thinking about how like LRTs are longer term going to look like bonds, where they're high grade LRTs and then they're high yield LRTs, depending on whatever like Renzo or Rio, whichever AVS they opt into, like that's going to affect the shape of the token. But right now they're all kind of like priced the same, which longer term they're not going to be. Some are going to trade at 90 cents, some are going to trade at 80 cents.
Yeah, exactly. They're all trading like they're AAA. And in reality, like the risk profiles that they'll be exposed to once slashing is live is going to range, from mega junk to AAA.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I know we're supposed to be talking about bridging, but I just think that this LRT space is so interesting. It just feels like the primordial like bond market.
Yeah, I mean, it all intertwines, right? At the end of the day, and really what you guys are describing, I'm thinking about somebody spinning up a protocol, to solve for these, these different risk profiles, and almost simplifying and abstracting away, the risk management piece of it, so users can have a seamless user experience when they're deciding these things, right? And that's just on EigenLayer, it's just on LRTs. Arjun, I know you had some. You took your mute button off. Did you have some thoughts?
Well, the only thing I was going to comment is that I do feel like there's just this constant trend in this space where we seem to like innovate a ton, and then like when we look back retroactively, and like people are sort of in the fog of war trying to figure out, well, what is the best way to build XYZ, and then when you kind of after the fact look back at it, you realize, okay, we've basically just rebuilt all of the existing financial primitives. And it makes sense, right? That's like the local optima that we've gotten to in finance. So it makes sense that we're kind of heading in the same direction for crypto as well. It's a sign of a healthy and maturing industry. But yeah, until we get something like Moody's, I'm still a little cautious.
Even when we get Moody's, I'm going to be cautious. To be honest.
Yeah, that's right. I bet Nick feels the same way.
Yeah, I mean, even in TradFi, bonds are notoriously hard to like pool together in the way that stocks are. I mean, I think like
it's why every firm has a credit analyst, right?
Yeah, and that's why credit is still traded over the phone, because it's really hard to price.
Yeah, these are good thoughts. And I guess just to segue, I guess into the topic I wanted to ask you guys about, right? So we obviously that whole discussion's surrounding really like enhancing security, at the end of the day. So I think, at the beginning I talked about, obviously wormhole, multi-chain, some of these, I guess, famous problems that have come up with large bridging protocols. Walk us through maybe some of the lessons you guys have learned from those events. Were there things that you guys implemented when you were thinking about your protocols in the aftermath of those things? Just touch on that a little bit. John, why don't we start with you?
So I think, like, even before the aftermath of those things, just one thing that we've tried to do here is like, so this is going to be very unfortunate to say, but like all these systems get exploited, all of them. I think it's just a matter of time. There's always just someone who is smarter than you and is going to figure something out. And so I think kind of as a general principle, like you want to build crypto systems a lot more like aerospace, right? Where like, hey, you don't want the plane to crash because when it does, a bunch of people die. Then you do want to be building it like how you build a system at Google. Because when things go wrong at Google, generally speaking, it's like, Drive takes a long time to load, or like I can't like this YouTube video. And so the stakes are much lower, right? And so if you think of where a lot of engineers, a lot of very, very good engineers have been trained in like the last decade, it's a completely different environment insofar as the stakes, right? You make a tiny mistake in crypto and you're out 9 figures, right? The plane is crashing from the fucking sky. You make that, make a much bigger mistake at Google, and again, the video doesn't load. Gmail drops, and yeah, that's terrible, but like, no one's really dying, probably. And so you have to just bring a different mindset to it, and then you have to kind of like prepare for what do we do in the eventuality that this will happen. So it's like, what are the best practices that we do when we develop? And again, thinking about things more like, how can we ship with an aerospace mindset as soon as we can? But I mean, it does mean we probably move a little bit slower than we would if this was Facebook, if this was a Google, or basically, again, trying to put any Web 2 lower stakes environment. And also preparing for what happens in the event that there is a breach. So like simulating cases. And also whenever there is an incident, actually opening up a war room and trying to dissect it. Like, Arjun, sorry to bring up a sore topic, but like when the Nomad hack happened, within 20 minutes of it starting to get airtime on the internet, we opened up a war room here. And within a couple hours, had a pretty good sense of what we thought had happened. I tried to communicate that to those folks. And, so that level of preparation, because ultimately, like almost all of the hacks so far are born out of issues in software development, and very few of them you would say are like issues of the security model itself. It's usually like somewhere in the implementation process there was some type of bug, something, or like not even a bug, but basically 2 things operating unexpectedly. And those are the only way to really prepare for or to mitigate is those best practices in development. And then you have cases like multi-chain where you could say it's actually, it's kind of like a failure of the model. It's like something going wrong with your multi-sig construction. It's a person going rogue. It's, or it's someone getting hacked because of bad OPSEC, like was the Ronin case. And so I think because of all these things, what we do at Hyperlane is we take in the modular approach to security, because my sense is, again, every security model eventually will get breached in one way or the other, and so you can't kind of you can't hitch your wagon to a single one, and you want to be there to be able to accommodate whatever is the state of the art. And so in Hyperlane, basically anything that provides a state attestation or a state proof can be wrapped as a security module and then incorporated by developers that are using Hyperlane. And you just have to do everything you can to make sure that your own software that you develop, that you're really taking it seriously, that stuff actually is reviewed, that you hire people who are thinking a little bit about security in everything they do. And That's kind of how we think about it. But I don't think there's a lot of silver bullets, and that's what's the hard part about this industry.
Arjun, what are your thoughts on that? I had forgotten about the Nomad hack, actually. So thanks for
Yeah.
reminding me.
Yeah, that one was just fascinating in the way that it went down. And yeah, I mean, I think I would echo a lot of what John said, and just add to it that like I think like bridges obviously have a terrible reputation around this, and there's a good reason for it. And like when you think about it, that reason is simply that like interop is effectively the same topic as scalability, effectively the same thing, and it's as like important and as critical as building a blockchain. Now, when you like blockchains have been around since 2008, right? Every chain that exists and that operates at scale, at least every chain framework that operates at scale and has been doing so without bugs for a very long time, is at least in some way based off of the Bitcoin blockchain code base. And like, so you had like years, many years of time where you had the system that was just battle tested in production before that, like people could fork off of before anything, like before people started really doing crazy innovative stuff. And like, you do see this with chains as well, where when there have been chains that have gone and like rolled an entirely novel code base from the ground up, they have kind of struggled. Like, I mean, this is one that I don't think anyone really is necessarily surprised by, but like IOTA is a really good example of this, where like there were just critical issues in their implementation that just never went away, and that was just because they had like rolled all of their own infrastructure. Just, I think for anything like this, where it's like, it's intended to be so critical, it's just not a good idea to roll everything yourself. You should try to leverage existing battle tested components as much as possible. So yeah, I think the solution to it is like, and this is something that really we've learned and have tried to adopt and kind of like, be proponents of as much as possible. But I think the solution is really modularity, to have like different parts of the stack focused on securing different pieces of the puzzle. And that way you don't have like one project that is independently trying to succeed on everything at the same time. And then aside from that, I think it's just, taking this like very cautious approach of like, hey, this is a system that needs to be we have to be very methodical in the way that we think about rolling it out, and the way that we think about like upgrading it, and the way that we think about like iterating on it, and building, like trying to get leverage as much support as you can from the ecosystem, from auditors, researchers, from platforms like Immunify, et cetera, to be able to like reduce risk as much as possible. But yeah, ultimately, like it's not something that you can completely eliminate. And like, I think the final point here is that even today, right, as recently as a few years ago, we have been finding like critical vulnerabilities in core internet protocols that were written in like the 80s. And like these are protocols that are used all over the world and have been used as a core part of the internet for decades. So, this risk never really truly goes away. It's just something that you can over time like constrain, and you can build around by like, taking a very pragmatic, safety oriented approach.
Nick, what about you? Any additional thoughts? I think they covered it pretty good, so I don't know if they left you any good keynotes here, but any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, nothing really to add, but I guess as an avid user of DeFi, the number one thing I think about is lendiness. Like if team has been around for a while and hasn't been hacked, and I'm just assuming there have been many hack attempts on this protocol and they haven't been hacked yet, like they're gaining like defense points over time. I also just think like building in the open, building in public, building public source, like talking about your ideas in the public forums, all gives your like adversaries the opportunity to counter you, and this contributes to lendiness. So I really care about reputation in the space, and obviously the Nomad team had a great reputation, and that bug can happen to anyone. So of course you have to be very cautious when building, and building slowly is something I care about. But as a user, yeah, I guess I like really look out for teams that don't try to take shortcuts, and I think that indicates a good culture on the inside, which reduces the probability of making mistakes.
Yeah, no, these are good points, and what I want to shift into is kind of like the end game for interoperability. I want to hear you guys' thoughts on connecting the various L1s as well, the various VMs, right? So EVM obviously is a huge focus. But Solana, Cosmos, some of these other ecosystems with a lot of volume, a lot of liquidity, right? How do you guys think about like bridging that gap? Or maybe you've already thought about this in your own protocol and it's already implemented, but how important is that, to unify, I think, all the blockchains out there, so that way the user experience is pristine. John, do you have any thoughts on that?
Do. So I think it's so obviously we would very much like for it to be the case that all the chains do get unified in a somewhat seamless manner. And that really was a big part of the motivation to build Hyperlane as this permissionless system. Again, a permissionless way to set the pipes, because that should be the most conducive if we want it to be everywhere, right? If you think that the world is going to have so many chains, then build something that other people could put anywhere, and that would be the most likely to enable that. Now, from a user experience being really, really robust and just smooth, I don't think it's actually critical to have all of the chains, but to have the major ones. And I was talking about this with the founder of a major wallet just yesterday. And it's interesting that right now, 7 years into my journey into crypto, like my favorite wallet right now is Rabby, because again, I'm fairly active on multiple chains. And it's the case that whenever we do that, like just using MetaMask is kind of a pain in the ass, because you have to do a lot of the navigation, switching chains, like making sure that you're using the right RPCs, etc. And Rabby abstracts some of that away, but it's still, what it does is it, your key derives a bunch of addresses on kind of all the relevant chains, and it displays everything in the same place, and that's very convenient. And when you're trying to use an app that's on a different chain, it does some sniffing to figure out, oh, well, you probably want to send it on Arbitrum, and I'm not going to ask you to go and press a button and switch from Ethereum to Arbitrum. And that's convenient. But what it's not doing is it's not treating everything, for good reason, as one unified entity. And so one thing that we've worked on here, and we're now kind of thinking about how to bring back into a permissionless setting, is we've brought this concept from Cosmos of the interchain account. And really what it is we brought it to the EVM, and really what it is, it's a way for contracts on one chain, it could be any chain where Hyperlane is on, get to be the owner of contracts on different chains that Hyperlane is on, and they can all be controlled from that one contract in a way that like you don't actually need to interface with the other chains directly. You're not deploying anything on those chains. And so for a user, imagine like if you actually had, say, one smart wallet that's on a chain like Arbitrum or Optimism or Base or wherever, and that automatically at the moment of creation deployed other contracts for you on other networks, and it's connected through some interoperability pipes. And now you can execute actions on all of those other chains, but you don't need to actually be initiating the action from an account that is physically held by you on, say, Base or Ethereum or Arbitrum. Right? Like the system handles all the gas abstractions. You still need to have an account funded in one place, but this one system handles all the commands, all the gas abstraction, and that's how I think like you could end up with a much better and less fragmented feeling user experience, but there's still a little while to go.
Nick, what are your thoughts on that?
Sorry, it was muted. Yeah, I think the number one thing that we need to build is fast token transfers across different chains. Fast, cheap, secure. So however we get there, I think there'll be many ways, like between Connext across and other protocols to send the tokens. These are all going to be built on top of messaging networks like Hyperlane. So those messages will also have to be fast, secure, and cheap. And ideally supporting as many chains as possible and as many tokens as possible. I know this is like a very obvious answer, but I just think speed and UX and cost is just super important. So however we get there.
Arjun, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I really love the Hyperlane vision in that so I guess this is something that we've been thinking about for a while as well. And like from our perspective, we'd always kind of thought about this problem as like, well, rollups are effectively going to be like servers in the future, right? People are going to spin them up to be able to like build applications, build ecosystems that can like be decentralized from day one and can interact with like the benefits of blockchains, but without having to like deal with actually running a chain, because running chains is awful. And it stands to reason then that like your server has to come connect to the internet. Otherwise, there's just no point, right? Like why would you use a box, an AWS box that doesn't have any internet access? And for that to happen, you need, you know, what John is describing, which is just like you need to have that connection available on day one. But I think beyond that, what we're kind of realizing now over time is that like it's going to take a really long time for there to be like not even really long time, but there are fundamental limitations on like how you can enable secure messaging between chains, right? I think in the long term, we could get to the point where all of these chains are interoperating with one another synchronously through things like shared sequencing. But in order to get there, like we need to achieve orders of magnitude, like improvements in ZK proving costs. And there's so much work that needs to happen before we get there. It's very unclear if that will ever happen to the extent where you can have like synchronous communication happening on every block of every chain at once, right? And so if that's the case, right, if you say, for instance, even if you have like shared sequencing and things like that in the future, you could build that sort of model on top of something like Hyperlane, right, as just an ISM. But even in that world, if you have this limitation where like, okay, you can only do, produce a shared block between two rollups once every like 10 to 20 minutes or so, well, that's still not good enough for user experience. And so for us, and I think Across is in the same boat, like there is this, I think the ultimate kind of like interoperability endgame vision is that you need this whole stack where you decouple like the transport and security pieces of interoperability from the user experience piece. And this is the like analogy here is like the difference between, you know, L1s and L2s, where L2s like decouple security and the underlying settlement from the user experience. So like on an L2, you can have this like fast, cheap, instant experience where you don't really even need to know that you're interacting with a blockchain as long as you're on that L2. And then under the hood, that system is secured by Ethereum. And that security happens by posting proofs to Ethereum once every so often. And I think we're kind of headed towards the same end state with Interop, where there's going to be like pipes under the hood that look like Hyperlane. And that I'm strongly hoping are Hyperlane, because I think Hyperlane is a fantastic protocol. And then you're going to have, you know, security modules that will be applicable on a per chain basis. And I think that there's a lot of value to be captured there for people that build really awesome like clients, really amazing like shared sequencing systems. And then on top of all of that, you'll have systems like Across and Connext, where we will be the protocols that are abstracting away all of this. You know, sort of the same way that like HTTP abstracts away the web for web developers. You don't, as a application developer on the web, you're not having to interact with lower level internet protocols, because that would be, you know, that's just like extremely challenging to do, and it's just a pain to have to manage. But instead, as a user or as a developer, you're just interacting with this system that sits on top that just gives you funds, does the thing you need to do immediately on the target chain, and in the background figures out how to negotiate with Hyperlane and any other security modules in the background.
So we're coming up on the end of our time here, guys, and this has been a fantastic discussion. Really appreciate you guys coming on. Wanted to ask give you guys an opportunity to plug maybe what you're most excited about coming up here in the coming months or the coming years, whether it's for your protocol or if it's just for the space in general. What's getting you guys excited? I mean, I know Eigenlayer, obviously this is one of those things we talked about. John, why don't you lead us off?
I'd say for me, the thing, and even actually before I get into that, Arjun, thank you for the very kind words, to totally honest. That was very, very nice of you, so thank you. The big things for us, I guess now there's only 9 months left of the year, so I could say, I was going to say the next 6 months. I might as well make it for the rest of the year. First, instantiating new forms of security, headlined by, excuse me, by economic security. So that should be happening anytime over the next, call it, 4 months or so, and very excited about that. And then continuing to make the protocol easier to deploy and extend to new chains and operating it on those new chains. That's another big work stream of ours over the the same period. And last, it's just really cool now to see all the different apps that are building with Hyperlane. So Mitosis, which is building like a liquidity layer with Hyperlane, is launching later this month. Superform, which is building like an interchain yield app, they launched with Hyperlane, not too long ago, and they've had some great traction and progress. And so I'm realizing now I should probably not spoil the surprises that our marketing team has been working on, but there's 4 or 5 upcoming launches that I'm just really excited about.
Yeah, Superform has got me excited as well. We're actually going to have them on here in a couple of weeks, but love that.
Hell yeah, that's great.
Yeah, love that.
Great bunch.
Yeah. Nick, what do you have on your mind?
I actually think the AVS question is really fascinating as a DeFi participant, and also for Across specifically, really interested to dive in there and figure out whether we can use it to speed up our capital efficiency and recycling of capital for relayers. We also just recently released a standard with Uniswap, Uniswap X. We're going to be trying to partner with them to share fillers across our protocols and also use their comparative advantage in auctions and originating intents and get them and have those intents be settled on Across, where we have a comparative advantage in bridging.
Awesome.
Last but not least, Arjun, what about you?
So I guess there's a couple of things. So I guess one is, as a quick retro on Q1, I think something that we're super excited about is that we had this goal of trying to reignite our growth in Q1. And I think with this focus around trying to solve problems for projects that want to abstract away the chain experience. And I think that we've really knocked that out of the park. I'm super proud of the team and of the whole Connext ecosystem doing this, where we've kind of over the course of the last couple of months become the largest, at least according to L2B, the largest protocol by bridge TVL from Ethereum, and then also one of the largest bridges by volume, neck and neck with Across. So I think this is we're super excited to see this, because I think it really validates some of the stuff that we've been thinking about now for quite a long time. And then as far as next steps go, what we're focused on going forward and for the rest of the year, and we'll definitely have a lot more announcements coming around this soon. But we're sort of seeing where we are at the moment as a POC stage, where in order to have this truly abstracted ecosystem, you can't just be supporting a small number of chains. You can't just be supporting a small number of assets, and you need to be able to allow for creating that this scaling this intent model to every single ecosystem permissionlessly. This is something that we've been thinking about for a while, and especially in the context of what Nick just mentioned, which is settlement. How do you settle intents across an unbounded number of chains? And we think we've finally gotten to the point where we've come up with a solution for it. So we'll be talking about that a lot more, probably coming up later at the end of this month or start of next month onwards. And yeah, Nick, actually, I will be hitting you up about that as well, because I think it's quite closely related to the problems that both Across and Connext have been working on for some time, and I think there's some interesting ways to collaborate there.
Yes, please do that.
Well, I hear a roundtable episode 2 coming on for this topic. That's what I hear. No, thanks, guys. Really appreciate your time. For those of you in the audience, definitely go follow these guys. I'm sure you already do. Check out what they're doing. Check out Revelo Intel. We've got a lot of resources on bridging, on these protocols specifically that you can dig into for free, in most cases. So, definitely take a look at that. And we'll see you next week for episode 10 of the roundtable. Same time, same place. We appreciate it.